So, our next speaker is a well-known public commentator. She's been working on women's rights, human rights, and law and development in Sub-Saharan Africa for nearly 2 decades. As founder of a joint European doctoral program called EDOLAD, she supports research in the role of law in international development. Challenging the dominance of Western or Northern academics, she's been organizing annual summer schools for early career researchers in the Global South. Please welcome Professor at the Department of Public and International Law, Ingunn Ikdahl.
Thank you, Asta. Thanks so much for this invite to reflect on the role of the legal scholar in the world and on the promises and pitfalls of legal activism. And also thanks to the earlier presenters today for sharing your insights and reflections. My starting premise is to question whether we ever face a choice of being either scholars or activists. That perhaps, in a broad sense of the word, we cannot avoid being activists. As scholars, we contribute to the production of knowledge. Nearly 400 years ago, Thomas Hobbes wrote that knowledge is power. And Michel Foucault also coined the term power-knowledge as an expression of the mutuality between the two, that power is based on knowledge and makes use of knowledge, but also that power reproduces and shapes knowledge. So as academics, we continually make decisions about the production of knowledge through our choices as to what we research, which themes we emphasize in our teaching, and which PhD projects we support. So to suggest that this can be done without an actor role, that you can draw a clear line between the academic activities and the exercise and existence of power, would suggest then that law and knowledge about the law can be detached from power, context, and politics, from a history and a future. I do not believe that. So I suggest approaching this not as a question of scholar versus activists, but rather about making conscious choices between different ways to act and present and engage and interact. And of course, then, remaining silent or remaining passive is also a choice. So thus, my title is A Closet Full of Clothes, Tailoring Your Legal Activist Outfit. There is a myriad of different ways, then, to carry out our role, and the challenge is to choose and adapt the way that we act under specific circumstances. And in some ways, this resembles standing in front of a closet full of clothes and choosing what to wear. So I'll now give 3 personal examples of pieces in my own closet of activist outfits. The first is what I'm wearing right now, the black trousers and white shirt outfit. The safe choice for all occasions. It's not provocative, it's not controversial. People hardly notice it as being an outfit at all. An academic version of this is contributing to public debate through dissemination of the basics of our knowledge. So when law-related issues appear in public debates, even very basic explanations of concepts and norms can be useful and needed indeed. So the point then is not to promote a particular interpretation or view on a controversial issue, but to share the basic knowledge. So of course, such curating of information also entails that you make choices, but this type of outfit then allows you to tone down your own perspectives. The idea is rather to contribute knowledge as pointers for others, so they can develop their own analysis, their own views, including politicians and journalists, as well as judges and the general public. So why do I still want to call this activism? Well, it's partly to demystify the idea of activism. I think this is not something that only some scholars choose to do. That whenever public debates touch on our own fields of scholarship, we should then engage in conscious efforts to bring our knowledge to bear on the debates, to ensure that it can be informed by, for example, an understanding of law and the legal structures. Then, however, there are also more risky activist outfits to choose. A second version is the piece of clothing with more personality, with more a wish to be seen and noticed. Today, I wear it in the form of an orange jacket. I put on this second outfit last year in the context of the Norwegian so-called Nav-scandal, where wrongful application of EU or EEA law had led to large-scale miscarriage of justice against recipients of certain social insurance benefits in cases where they had been then traveling abroad. In addition to causing massive financial distress for thousands of people, there were around 50 or so wrongful criminal judgments as well, without legal basis, including imprisonment. My choice of a more colorful activist outfit in that case came from a growing unease about the narrative, the explanations that came to dominate the public sphere. That some perspectives, some lines of arguments were remaining in the shadows. So feeling an increasing urge to highlight these, I did some interviews with media, moving beyond mere neutrality towards more explicit critique of the views of others. Clearly, voicing critique through mass media is far from the scholarly traditions. We know that media privileges arguments that are short, tabloid, controversial, and fitting into the day-to-day news cycle. So it can be hard then to avoid being drawn into pure politics or into the political agendas of others. So to handle this, eventually with colleague Kristoffer Eriksen, we tailored then a specific outfit, establishing an academic blog on the case, trying to unpack the developments as they were taking place. And that type of media, writing a blog, has an advantage of allowing us to present longer arguments. It was thus more in line with our familiar role as academics, but still allowing us to bring critical perspectives to the broader public debate. I think it's a key point that critique should not be limited to articles and books read mainly by other scholars in our own fields. Immanuel Kant wrote on the unfeigned respect that reason grants only to that which has been able to withstand its free and public examination. As academics, we are in a rare and valuable position of freedom and autonomy to participate in such free and public examination and critique. But of course, that also means that our own arguments, they must also be able to withstand free and public examination. So even if the style of writing or speaking is different in public debates, many of the academic requirements to the scholar remains, of founding your views, your arguments in proper sources, and being transparent about the basis for your claims. So, a third piece of clothing is this big warm shawl. This is a piece of clothing which is extremely handy when you're traveling. You can wrap it around you when you're entering the cold, air-conditioned meeting rooms. You can use it to cover your bare shoulders when entering a house of worship. So the key word then is that this is a piece of clothing that allows you to shift between contexts. Part of my work as an academic has been in Sub-Saharan Africa, doing research and teaching in fields such as gender equality, human rights, and law and development. And research in these fields is frequently closely linked to ideas that academic knowledge can indeed be used for the good of society. Of course, the discussion of whether concepts such as human rights and gender equality and justice and development are universal or if they're Western, how they relate to the dynamics of culture and power, that's a rich and complex one. And I think Sanjeeb clearly pointed out the importance of discussing these. And Malcolm and Anniken both touched upon how scholarly methods can provide us with tools to handle them. However, I want to highlight a quite different set of pitfalls of being the global legal scholar or activist out to do good. Because when the actor is a privileged Western academic, activism clearly also comes with a potential for reproducing or reinforcing patterns of inequality in power and resources, also in our cooperation with colleagues in the Global South. A particularly paradoxical example to me was when the European partners of our cooperation were pressuring or leveraging their influence at a partner university in the South to have a specific topic included at a conference. The topic was the need for decolonialization. And the irony of the Northerners being the one pushing for the Global South to discuss decolonialization was not left unspoken by the participants, to put it mildly. But discussing the risk then of instrumentalization of the voices of the third world scholars, Obioma Nwaemeka has warned that as researchers or scholars, they are the instrument for collecting the raw data with which foreign scholars manufacture knowledge. They are being consigned to case studies to concretize and feed into the abstractions of the theory section, which is usually written and printed in the North. Anne Stewart has pointed out how legal theory and writing itself can be a global commodity chain with a high-value good. The very pricey monographs of the high-ranking publishing houses are being marketed and sold in the North, but building on and involving the labor of academics in the production zones. So how can we then deal with that type of pitfalls of being the global legal scholar? I believe that a key responsibility for our and my activism is also then community building. And then following a series of summer schools for early career researchers in the Global South, I now witness the growth of young academics who are presenting much more forceful critique in their fields than what I would be able to do, and who are in positions to conduct legal activism much more wisely than I can. So that's perhaps also an underestimated value of the shawl as a legal activist outfit, that it's a piece of clothing that can easily be shared with others. As scholars, we always interact with power as we produce knowledge. So I deeply believe we need to make conscious decisions about what type of outfits we choose for different occasions. These were some of mine. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingunn. As a person from arts and culture, I, of course, really appreciated the performative aspect of your lecture. And orange is a great color, brings energy. Okay, so do we have some questions? This was the last lecture. Yes, please, take the stage and the mic. Welcome.
Thank you. Uwe Kennett, student at the law faculty. The anthropologist from the US, Clifford Geertz, wrote an essay called Anti-Positivism, where he was making the basic argument that being against something doesn't mean that you're for the opposite. And the example he used was the pro-choice movement. People are pro-choice or against the pro-life movement aren't pro-abortion, they're pro-choice. So it's an anti-anti relationship. I thought your second clothing highlighted something I felt was under-communicated in the previous lectures, that being an activist doesn't necessarily mean being for something. You can also, in a scholarly capacity, be against it. Do you think there's an important distinction between an activist that's for a case and an activist that's against what they see as an untruth or injustice? And do you think that's informing this conversation? Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a very important point to make, and I think that's also what can sometimes present pitfalls and make academics reluctant to engage in activism. Because as soon as you critique someone, you are then seen automatically as being in favor of taking the opposite side, when you might be trying to nuance the argument or point out the weaknesses of an argument, saying that we do not know this for sure, we cannot make that claim, but it doesn't necessarily mean the opposite. I think that's also part of what sometimes makes the public debate a difficult place to be, because of the media's need for the short statements that keep the public reading, and often then ending up with polarizing discussions more than necessary. And that's why I think I would recommend everyone to establish a blog as providing you with a place where you can make the longer arguments, and then using that as a point of departure for also providing shorter comments. Allowing for retaining some of the sort of the academic way of arguing and the nuances, rather than being captured by the speed of the public debate. So I think that feeds into this search for midfield, sort of something between the heavy academic articles that are enjoyed by very few, usually, and a public debate which doesn't allow for the full arguments, to try to find ways of communicating that can sort of fit in this middle. And this also has to do with time, I guess, that if you want to write the full academic arguments out, you want to have them in the good publication, it takes a year, it takes 2 years, it takes 3 years to get it out. And by then, the public interest that brought you to the question may already have passed. So also finding ways to be able to engage, retaining your sort of integrity as a scholar, but with more or less the speed of the news cycle.
Yes. You know, I'm so starstruck. the Letten Prize Laureate.
Yes, I'm afraid I have to disappoint you a bit with this comment, because it might not be as intellectual as you might hope to be. But I am from the Netherlands, as you know, and I couldn't help but comment, because orange is the color of our royal family.
Of course.
So I would interpret your outfit completely differently. And I'm sure if you'd wear this to my country, you'd be welcomed. Very much, and you immediately have a lot of friends. And I was wondering, I have a question related to that, because I think being a global scholar, that is one of the main challenges, to pick the right outfit and the right way of communication in different cultures that actually might be very hard to understand from as an outsider. And I think this really reflects the previous talks as well. So I was hoping you could give some tips on how to choose the right outfit, the right tone of communication.
When I was doing my fieldwork in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, over one day of work, I could start by doing interviews in an informal settlement, much like ones on Malcolm's PowerPoint earlier today, and then later in the day going to the Ministry of whatever and being very welcomed by the virtue of my red Norwegian passport, and then being associated with sort of the oil fund and all the kinds of power that Norway can exercise in the global south. And I think that's maybe where my love of this shawl comes from, because it allows you to wrap up in more or less formal ways, and then not taking yourself too seriously, usually, and not being too mindful of how your outfit is perceived, as long as you're comfortable with it. And I think that goes in a more metaphorical sense as well.
Thank you. Very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ingunn Ikdahl.